In September 2003, Roselena and Raymond Sanders and Penny and Brad Wright were together in Ireland. This was recorded at Brogan's Inn, where we were staying, in the city of Trim. I wanted to talk with Raymond about his experiences as an Army medical officer in World War II. How old were you when you went into the service? How did you get drafted? How did you first know that you were going to be drafted?
Well,
Did you sign up?
I signed up. I was of draft age. I graduated from high school in 41, and my draft number was coming up. I had gone to 1 year of school at Weber, and I had started the second. And the only way that I could finish the quarter I was in was to enlist. And so many of us from Weber, me and many of my friends and acquaintances at Weber who were in the same boat, went down and enlisted. Some enlisted in different branches. Some went into the Air Force or the Navy. I was so much underweight I couldn't get into anything but the Army. So I went with many of my friends into the Army, and that way we're able to complete 2 quarters of our second year at Weber and not have to leave in the middle of the second quarter. So it was just a matter of weeks, but it was meant not having to redo what we'd already done. So we went in the middle of April. We all went down to Fort Douglas.
In Salt Lake.
In Salt Lake, and that's where we were enlisted and got our basic assignments, or our initial assignments. But I remember that they'd have us doing little things during the day, like picking up cigarette butts and that sort of thing around there, anything to keep us out of mischief.
How old were you?
I was 19. And one of my friends, Jennings Olson, had gone down with us. And Jennings was put to washing windows in the barracks. And Jennings had a very nice tenor voice. And he sang all the time he was washing these windows. We could hear Jennings all over camp. He and his window washing crew, he was entertaining them and us. He'd be hanging out of the windows, washing the outside of the window, singing away. We were much jollier, I'm sure, in those few days we were in Salt Lake than we were in the immediate. Some of them were, like Dill Young, were killed very soon after we left for our various basic training. He to the Tank Corps. And some of us, like Willy, and I went down to Texas to the medical corps.
Did you choose that?
No, I didn't. They had given us tests of various kinds which was really more or less filling out forms at Fort Douglas. Why I keep calling it Ord, I don't know. That at Fort Douglas, and based upon those, supposedly, then they had put us in our. Now I don't know, can't imagine what Dill Young had scored high in that he got in the Tank Corps. Mm-hmm. But anyway, Willy and I ended up in the medics, and then we of course all went our separate ways to our various basic training camps. And Willy and I went down to Camp Barkeley, Texas, and I think we were the only two in our bunch who went in at that time, who went down there. We were with a lot of other soldiers, but they were not from Camp Douglas, from Fort Douglas. So that's where we went for basic training.
And you were talking about how homesick.
I had never been away from home before. And I thought I was going to die. Couldn't believe that anyone could feel as lousy as I did and survive. But I would only break down and weep when I called home, which I did every chance I got. Mm-hmm. And But my father apparently felt that he needed to come see me because he had to go on business to Texarkana, Arkansas. And so he routed himself home through Camp Barkeley, and they gave me a pass, which was surprising because I was just in basic, and they didn't usually give you passes into town until you had been in a little longer than we had been. But because he was there, they gave me a weekend pass, and I spent the week with him in Abilene. And it was very beneficial. I never had that terrible homesickness again. I was able to knuckle down and do my best.
Now, how did you get into OCS?
Well, at the end of basic training, and or before the end of basic training, those who wanted to apply for OCS could do so. And I applied, and I talked Willy into applying, and he finally succumbed and did. And we were in the same unit in OCS. We were in the same platoon, as I recall. So we were then for 90 more days.
Same place.
Same place. And we would take these long hikes. We start out with short ones, of course, a few miles, 5-mile hikes, and then by the time we got to the end of those 90 days, we were hiking 30 miles, distances like that. But it affected my knees. I don't know what I had, but they'd swell and get red. But I didn't dare complain to anybody. So I would stand in the shower for long periods of time, out in a hot shower when we'd get back and try to get the swelling out of my knees. And I managed to get through without ever having it. And I never had trouble once I got out of training. I never did have troubles with them again. But I thought if I had ever let him get me on sick call, I'm going to be.
Now, what I want to know is why did you put hot water on when you tell me swelling? You must have cold.
Because I didn't have cold. Well, I could have put cold water, I guess. But in Texas, you don't get cold water even out of the cold water tap because all those big water towers get awful hot. So your water is hot no matter which tap you get it out of.
So you came out as a
second lieutenant. Second lieutenant.
Okay, and not a commissioned officer.
Okay. In the medical administrative corps.
Okay. So then, where did you go? As soon as you got your commission, where'd you go?
Well, I got to leave home, and for a week or so, and then I went back to Camp Barkeley for assignment. And while we were waiting for assignment, we were in a sort of a replacement depot, and they would send us out to work with the training platoons. So I'd work in a training unit until I got an assignment. So I imagine I must have been 3 or 4 months in a training unit.
Now, did you actually work with injured or sick?
No. We worked.
Did you have any hands-on experience?
No. We were trained in administration, and we did have some a fairly extensive basic training in first aid, but beyond that we didn't get any training. The way the Army units are structured, every battalion had an aid station, which had a battalion surgeon and an assistant battalion surgeon. The battalion surgeon was always a medical officer, and it was usually a captain, sometimes a first lieutenant, but usually a captain, and then a medical administrative officer who was the assistant, and he was usually a first or second lieutenant. And that's where I ended up, actually, eventually. After I finally got an assignment, it was in May, and I can't remember. But you see, this is a little over a year because I went in April. And in May of 44, I was shipped to, as was Willy, we were shipped to Naples, or just outside of Naples, in a replacement depot there. We had no assignment, but we were to be assigned to any of the military units who needed them. Well, at that time, the 3rd Division was restaging. They had landed in Africa. They were the first American troops to land in North Africa. They had gone up through Italy, all through the boot, and were in Anzio, in the Battle of Anzio. They were pulled out, and another, I don't know what division replaced them, some other division replaced them there. And they were pulled back into this Naples area to restage, to get new replacements and to get their equipment and brought up to snuff and all that sort of thing, and get ready for the landing in southern France. Well, but while they were restaging, then I was assigned, as was Willy, to the 3rd Division. But he went to the 15th Regiment, and I to I've forgotten his battalion, and I to the 2nd Battalion of the 30th Infantry Regiment. And that's where I spent the rest of the war with
the 3rd Division.
With the 3rd Division.
Now, did you say the 3rd Division was the one that had landed in North Africa?
They landed in North Africa.
Okay, and then were they at Anzio and pulled back?
Uh-huh.
So they had already seen
they'd seen a hell of a lot of fighting. Yes, there were some guys in our outfit who were mighty tired soldiers. They were tired and bitter, and many of them alcoholic.
Well, some of them actually went on to land in France. And
Oh, yeah.
all the way to Berlin.
Some of them were with us right up to the very end. They from the beginning well, our division ended up in Berchtesgaden on the May 8th.
France first.
Yes, we went up across France. So we landed.
I remember you writing me letters
From
France, and you described what little French girls were wearing, and what was it like in France? Now, where were you? And
where did you land?
We landed at Tropez, Tropez.
Any resistance there?
No, there was no resistance there. They had mined the bay, excuse me, the offshore area. So these landing craft that we went in on, even though they're very shallow drafts, right? Some of them did set off some of the mines. So there were some of our units. One platoon in our battalion was virtually decimated by a mine. But enough of them were left that they could they get some replacements, and they went on. We didn't stop on the beach. We just went right on. And then there was very little resistance because the battle on the west coast of Normandy the Germans had pulled most of their troops that they could over to that defense, and had left only a very few troops in the south. Well, we encountered some resistance, but nothing like what we had anticipated and trained for.
When was it most dangerous for you personally? Where were you when?
I don't know.
What about when Patton swept through?
There were pockets.
Mm-hmm.
We'd get out and walk for miles and never see or hear a gun. And then we'd find a pocket of resistance, and we'd have to, we'd fight for a while. But we didn't.
Trenches ever?
No, not then.
Uh-huh.
But when we started going through the Siegfried Line, it had been penetrated in a few places, but the tank defenses were pretty good. They had these huge cement tank anti-tank
Pillbox things.
Well, they weren't pillbox. They were just big triangles. That's right. They were very big angular pieces that if a tank got up on them, it just tipped a tank over. But so it was hard to get through. And at that point, I had been lent from my own unit to the 7th Infantry Regiment, who were shorthanded. So I happened to be going through the Siegfried with the 7th Infantry. And I said, at least we thought that was maybe one of the most dangerous points. our unit, their unit, had been held down by gunfire, trying to get through the Siegfried, and they were all fighting in trenches, trying to get enough of a breach that they pushed the Germans back far enough that they could get in with the anti-tank groups and destroy enough of the these cement things that that the tanks could get through. Well, our outfit, we had wounded men out there, and we had been held down by fire, so we hadn't been able to get out and even get the wounded off the battlefield. But the next morning at 6 o'clock, we were going out. And believe me, we were all very much concerned because I figured I was going to lose a lot of men on this operation trying to bring in the wounded.
You had medics reporting to you?
That's right. And I was going to take out, I think I maybe had 3 or 4 stretcher teams.
Were you on foot or in?
See, each unit had its own first aid man with them. Every platoon had a first aid man with them, who were under our command, but they were out with the troops, and they would take care of them on the field. But then we had to go out and bring them into our aid station. Then we'd patch them up as much as they needed to get them on back to more critical care back in the field hospitals. Well, we got up ready to go at dawn, and we went out into these trenches, going out through the trenches out into the field where all these wounded were reported. Never heard a sound. Not a fire was not a gun was fired. Not a shot. And we went out. Just walked out, got our injured, and brought them back, and never did see us or hear anybody. Well, we were, of course, jubilant. This was great. Couldn't explain why until we got back and found out that during the night, Patton had reached the Siegfried Line with his tank division north and west of us, and had come in and behind the people who were defending. So they'd all left. So there was nobody there.
So what town would that have been around?
Well,
where did he break through?
I can't remember that now.
Okay.
At the time I knew, but I can't remember now.
Okay, but the Siegfried Line was on the German border.
It's on the German border.
So you'd have been all through France already.
That's right.
Without a lot of fighting, or had there been fighting?
Sporadic.
Sporadic fighting. When you hit Siegfried, now you knew you were going to have to confront significant forces.
Well, we had thought we would. Yeah, we thought. We'd had some stiff fighting before we got into the Siegfried, and I was still in my own unit at that time. I was only with the 7th briefly. Shortly after this, I went back to my own unit. But we were in the Colmar Pocket, and the Germans were trying to get out of Italy and back into Germany, and our mission was to cut them off. And so we'd gone into Colmar, our units had gone into Colmar to try to secure the bridge at Neuf-Brisach, I think is the town, or Neuf something, I think it's Neuf-Brisach, where it crossed the, whatever the river was there, I don't know what the river. But so anyway, there was a lot of fighting there. The Germans had that area strongly defended. And while we didn't take very many casualties, not because they didn't try. They would drive through the streets into the streets with their tanks, and they had an 80 millimeter gun. It was a rifled gun, and it was the terror. And we hated to see those tank guns because those 80 millimeter guns would fire and explode almost instantaneous. You'd hear the report from the muzzle report, and then you'd hear the bang.
Those were the big tiger tanks.
Yeah. And they were demoralizing more than anything, at least in our case, because we didn't take very many casualties from them, but They did a lot of firing and keeping you awake at night. And the other scary thing in the Colmar Pocket was we had on our left flank, we had a French unit. And the French are insane. We'd rather had Germans there than the French.
Really?
I had to go back to the regimental supply depot to get some supplies with our supply sergeant. And we went back through the French lines during the day. We came back, it was getting dark, and these guys, French, they had a huge bonfires. All the rest of us were going around with no light at all, going around in the dark. The French, these big bonfires, and machine gun fire sounded like we were being attacked, They were rabbit hunting.
Oh, good.
Hunting rabbits with these big bonfires. They were a danger to have anywhere near you.
Oh, but they ate well.
Oh, they ate well. Le pain.
But you got the Purple Heart. Now, what came about?
Well, this was before we went into the Colmar Pocket. We were in the Vosges Mountains, down around Remiremont. And we had at that time, our battalion commander had been killed. And they had made his assistant battalion commander, a man named Osgard, whom I'll never forget. A much hated man. Arrogant, he was a young man, but arrogant, and had no idea how to command people. And we had much loved our battalion commander before this guy, with whose name I now forget. I've forgotten the good guy, but I don't forget Osgard. But before we were well informed. The battalion aid station was informed of what they were going to do, because we were their support. Not with Osgard. He never let the aid station ever know anything. He would just get his company commanders together, and it was just, he figured they were the ones who needed to know. And by damn, we never knew anything with Osgard. So they started out, and we were supposed to be following him. We did not know where they were turning up. They went down a road out of Remiremont, and then they turned and went up on the mountain, the hills above in the mountains, and there was another mountainous road up there that sort of overlooked a town that they hadn't taken yet, but we didn't know they hadn't taken it. Well, the battalion commander had taken a jeep with all of the. We always divided in two. I had one jeep in the rear, where I kept an aid station going until I got one set up in advance. He had taken the jeep and had gone forward. Now I don't remember whether this this was Captain DeSantis, a wonderful man, but he had captured, or we'd overrun a couple of German motorcycles. We both had one, and he had this huge Indian motorcycle. It was so heavy that even he, who was a big, strong man, if that darn thing got over, he had to get help to straighten it up. It was a big curse. Well, he rode that all around the front. He'd go up to in front. He should have been at the aid station, but he wasn't. He was out there with in front on his damn. Well, he on this day, of course, was out with the front unit going up, and they went up this road with their equipment, and damn near got into this town that was held by the Germans. It was not captured yet. They were up. The unit was up on the mountainside, and but we were never informed, so we didn't know we were supposed to go up there. Nor did they leave any sign. They should have left a soldier there or something. They didn't, but they did nothing to tell you to turn off. So anyway, the Jeep hit the Jeep hit his mine, and I can't remember whether DeSantis hit a mine. He hit a mine before he was through with that darn motorcycle. I can't remember if it was that day or not. And he injured his back, and he was evacuated. We never saw DeSantis again. He wasn't killed, but we didn't come back to us anyway. So I was sent back word, not any instructions about how to get there. I was told what had happened, but I was to take my half of the unit up to join the rest of the battalion. So I started out. Same though, I had the same plan. Nobody told me. And I knew that they had hit a mine, but that didn't mean that anything. It didn't mean the town was taken. It just meant that they'd hit a mine. That was not uncommon. So I start up there and again did the same damn thing. I didn't know if there was any road, any place I was supposed to turn up. I just went down the bottom. And of course, by then it was daylight and the Germans were moving around. They began shooting at us. We didn't hit a mine. But we abandoned our Jeep and started climbing up the mountain because it was obvious that, this town wasn't taken. So we fortunately chose the same side that they had gone up, but it was just luck. We didn't know that. And there was me and I must have had half a dozen men with me and the Jeep driver. But we just started going up this mountainside, and then, of course the Germans were firing at us. And if they ever saw us, they'd start shooting their machine guns at us. And we ended up, 2 or 3 of us ended up in a French farmhouse up halfway up the hill, where we stayed for a little while till we tried to figure out what the hell was going on, which we never did do. We did finally decided we'd go on up the mountains because there seemed to be firing coming down the mountain, so we figured that at least our side was up there. We didn't know if it was our outfit or not. But while we were with these French farmers, as they were having lunch, and I remember very clearly they were having potatoes and sort of a grilled cheese, except it was a soft kind of, it wasn't cottage cheese, but it was a soft cheese. And which they fed us. They fed us the same thing they were eating. Then
How many of you?
I had one. I've forgotten how many of us there were, but there were only 3 or 4 of us in this house. They didn't all. We scattered out, so everybody didn't end up at this house. But those of us who did, they took care of us. And fortunately, one of the guys who the only one got hurt and got injured had a finger blown off, shot off, just the end of his finger. But he was with us, so we could take care of him. And then we just got out of there and went up the mountain, just trying to avoid a German fire or being shot at by our own. When we got up there, my God, it was our unit. There's our battalion. And some of the guys who had been on the first truck, the first Jeep, they were up there. And I had a very good friend who was our supply sergeant, Jake. What was his name? Jacob. Well, I'll think of it. But he was a boy from Montana. He had landed in North Africa with them, and he had become kind of an alcoholic, and he was in trouble with the unit all the time. He was very bitter about being so long in the war. But I kind of had taken him under my wing. He was older than I, but he was a good guy, and
Under your 20-year-old age.
we became very good friends. Really, and I remember he was one of the first people I saw up there, and he said, "Oh, God damn, Louis," he says, "I'm glad to see you." He says, "I'm just getting ready to go AWOL."
Oh, really? How did you get the Bronze Star?
Oh, hell, I don't remember what that was for. I have no idea what that was for now. But that was what, in that melee, I got a piece of shrapnel in the leg. That was what
That was a Purple Heart.
that was a Purple Heart. I had no idea I was even getting that. My Lord, it was just, I never, one of the aid men put a patch on me, and that was all it was to that one. But next thing I knew, I got a Purple Heart.
Did you have the shrapnel removed? I mean, don't you remember that?
I don't remember whether it even was stayed in. It may have just been crazy. I don't remember. It was fairly insignificant wound.
Wow.
It was nothing to, and I don't remember what that was
Well,
for.
you can remember, he just won't tell.
Oh, I cannot. I don't remember. People put you in for this stuff. You don't do it yourself, and
You didn't know it was happening.
no, you don't know what's happening until you get it. something I did somewhere along the way had impressed somebody that it was a little beyond the call of duty or something. I have no idea what it was,
Something great.
but it was. And I don't know. I suspect somewhere they must have given us a citation or a notation of what it was for. But hell, I've long lost all that.
So now you're in an administrative role theoretically.
Theoretically,
You're an
huh?
officer,
Mm-hmm.
but you're carrying arms.
No medics ever carried arms.
Medics never carried arms.
No, we never had arms.
Now why was that?
Against the Geneva Convention.
So you couldn't even carry a 45.
Mm-mm.
You could just be shot at.
You could be shot at, but we couldn't shoot back.
Okay.
They weren't supposed to shoot at us. We had one hellish big red cross on our Jeep.
Did they observe that?
Pretty much. Not always. The Germans were very individual too. You know, you'd get in some units, and I'm not so sure that that all of our soldiers observed. You weren't supposed to kill an injured man or anything of that kind. And I rather suspect that there were some of them who were
Well, what was
needlessly
it like,
killed. But
what was it like being a medic with no penicillin? Because you didn't get the penicillin until later.
no, we didn't have penicillin at the front. They had penicillin at the rear, and they used it in the hospital to treat infections. And it was so rare, I mean, it was so difficult to get, that they would collect the urine from patients who were being treated, and then they would process the penicillin from that, and that's what they used to treat people with venereal disease.
Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
But what did
You
you
used sulfa, didn't you?
Sulfa, we used a lot of sulfa, sulfa guanidine, we put sulfa on everything.
What did you use before on the venereal patients before you got penicillin?
Before penicillin, on syphilis, we used mercury. Mm-hmm. Shot mercury shots that they put in the glued, and it was thick and heavy to get out, hard to get out of a needle. You use a great big needle, and you'd line the poor devil up, having him stand spread eagled against the wall with his pants dropped, and then you'd race at him with his syringe and stick it into his glued. And of course they'd tighten up as soon as that made it more difficult to get that darn needle in there. But they got I think a shot a month or something like that. It wasn't frequent, but they had to come in.
Well, you were around enough action. Did you ever find yourself having to give medical aid?
Oh yeah, all the time.
All the time?
Oh yeah, we had
Did
to.
you have to go out on the field and get?
No, I didn't have to do that. But they would come into the aid station,
And then you would. patch
and
them
I would help. Yeah, so I'd help patch them up. The first aid men had already seen them before they ever came in. Usually. Now, of course, accidents could happen. I mean, you could have action right in front of the aid station or near the aid station, then you were the first one to see them. And the worst case I ever saw, the only one I had no idea what to do with, was at a time, I don't remember where we were now. I remember that the guy who was our battalion surgeon was a guy named Williams, Dr. Williams. And he's a pretty good doctor. I know there's nothing wrong with him, but he was jaded. He'd been in the army been at it too darn long too. But one night in a little town in Germany, or I mean, it might have been in Alsace or that area. It might have even been in the Colmar Pocket. I'm not sure. Don't remember where we were. Maybe Remiremont. But anyway, a truckload of soldiers passing through the town had been hit by a shell. And most of the guys in the truck were injured. I don't remember that there was anyone killed, but this guy would have been better off killed. They brought him into the aid station, and his whole front of his face had been blown off. And I had no idea what the hell to do with this. I had no idea So Williams, fortunately he was just in another room asleep. I mean, I got him, and he came in. He he immediately started stopping the bleeders and that sort of thing, and bandaged him as best we could do, and immediately sent him to the rear. And he got back to a hospital as quickly as possible where they could do something definitive for him. I don't know what they could do for him. And he may have died, I don't know, but that was the only casualty. And I've seen some awful casualties, but it's the only one I ever saw that I just was completely, had no idea what to do for him. I just did not know.
What was the most common? Was it limbs or?
Oh, the most common were either shrapnel wounds, superficial shrapnel wounds, or gunshot wounds. And most of those, if you saw them in the aid station, were not terribly serious. Some of them, we had to give them plasma and that sort of thing to get them into an ambulance and get them back out of there. But most of them were not really terribly serious. Fortunately. But, you did see some I've seen some awful gory-looking wounds, but most things you felt were not really life-threatening.
What about painkillers? What did you have?
Morphine. I used morphine.
Was it used generously?
Very generously, yeah. We got it in dose ampules so that you couldn't overdose.
Uh-huh.
And they came in little shots, and we didn't always give them all of it. We did give them what we thought they just.
I guess shock is one of the things you want to administer.
That's right. Shock is the thing you watch for, and that can do you more harm than the injury can if they go into shock. But we'd watch for that very carefully, and surprisingly, maybe we didn't see a lot of that. I don't remember really treating a lot of shock. Every once in a while, you'd have somebody that you'd have to elevate their legs and cover them up, and you try to keep them warm. And
so now you got through the Siegfried Line, and then you ended up in Berchtesgaden.
Well, in between that, I was then back with my own unit when we crossed the Rhine. So all of that happened before we crossed the Rhine. At Worms, or near Worms. And that's, I think, the only time I had a really experience that could have been life-threatening.
Really?
But it turned, fortunately, the German ammunition wasn't very good often. But we were in pre-dug, trenches that they'd already been dug before we ever got up. The engineers had dug all these trenches, and because their wave after wave was using them, And the boats would come up to the shore, and then you'd get up out of your trench, and then we crossed in boats at night.
Paddled rubber.
Yeah, they were paddled. They're quite big rowboats, but they were rowboats, and we just paddled across. I'm not sure that everyone went across that way, but this place we did, and we crossed at night. But they were being fired on from the other side. They knew what we were doing. And while I was, there were two guys. There was me and another guy in this trench I was in. They were various sizes. But while we were lying there, ka-whoosh, in comes a mortar. And the damn thing landed right in our...
Curtains, huh?
Well, and nothing happened. Not a sound except this. It landed right in our trench. What buried itself in the trench. But it fortunately didn't explode.
It didn't.
Of course, you didn't want to touch it either.
Oh, no. We got out of it. Thought hell is safer outside this hole than it is in it.
So you just hauled ass out of there.
Oh my God! What did you do? Where did you go there?
Oh, no place to go. You just wait. We're waiting for our turn to get on a boat. So he's just hoping the hell it gets there soon.
Oh my gosh! But it was at night.
It was at night.
And was there any kind of? I mean, it was at night, but could you be seen to be fired on, or were they just firing in?
No, there was a lot of trees and brush along the bank. I don't really have a very good picture of what the bank was because we moved in there after dark and we left before daylight.
Was it a strong current? Was it
I can't remember that. There was.
Rose, can we turn that light off for Rose?
Mm-hmm. we just got in these boats and hoped that hell we'd get across there before they sank us. And I don't think they sank any of the boats. I think by then they were really pretty well disorganized. This was after the Battle of the Bulge, which was their swan song.
Right.
And they were not very well organized, but there were a few of them over there popping stuff over at us. And we didn't know that, of course. We didn't know how many were over there. But when we got over there, by then it was daylight, and my hell, they loaded us up in trucks, and we started driving down the highway. Streams of German soldiers moving the other way with their hands on their heads or waving white flags or what have you, no arms, they'd all surrendering. So once we got across the darn thing, and they quit popping stuff at us from wherever they were, and we weren't taking much fire. We weren't really getting very much. But
you're with the 3rd Division at this time?
Back with my own unit then. But so we just started driving into Berchtesgaden from wherever we were, and we didn't get out and walk at all. We just stayed in the backs of these trucks and drove in. I didn't even have my aid station with me. I was just in a truck. Berchtesgaden was kind of an interesting experience. We pulled into Berchtesgaden, where we were not supposed to be. The Russians, they had some kind of an agreement. I think it was with the Russians and another unit. I think Clark was supposed to have come into Berchtesgaden. But they were too damn slow. We got in there ahead of them, and we couldn't just camp out there waiting, so we just drove on in. And we got there, and of course, the war wasn't announced to be over yet, so our first night there, it was pretty dark, and everybody had their drapes drawn in it. But May 8th, they signed the treaty, or they gave up. And that night, everybody's curtains were open, the street lights were on. We hadn't seen any lights, for 2 years, and all of a sudden, everything is illuminated, and everyone was rather jubilant.
The lights came on again.
Yep, the lights came on again.
The German civilians were happy.
Oh yes, they were.
I bet they were happy you were there instead of the Russians.
I suspect they were if they knew anything about the Russians, because they weren't. The Germans on the east were sure as hell they didn't want them in there. They were
and when
trying
did they blow the swastika on?
Well, that was later. We went. What was I doing in Munich? This was quite some time. I went to. We were only in Berchtesgaden for a week or two. I don't know. And we'd gone up and gone all through what was left of the Eagle's Nest. Mm-hmm. Most of that was underground. There were huge bunkers underground. Supplies you couldn't believe. There were underground warehouses full of the best French wines and champagne. And if you don't think the army loved this, you see those soldiers coming out of there with as many bottles as they could carry. Nobody was trying to stop them.
Did you get into the living quarters too?
Well, yeah, the living quarters were all burned out. They'd been bombed out.
Oh, okay.
But I have a picture that I took looking out the big window, that looked down on Berchtesgaden.
The one where Hitler was, his famous picture.
Yeah.
Looking out.
Yeah. But that part was all burned out. But of course, nothing underground had been hurt any, and all of that wine.
Bunkers have been used for 5,000 years at least to store the treasures.
Did you ever have occasion to treat German soldiers?
Oh yeah, you bet.
Mm-hmm.
And they were supposed to be brought in just like like our own, Mm-hmm. We usually bring our own first, but they were brought in, and if they could walk, they'd come in as ambulatory patients. We'd treat them, and we didn't try to of course to interview them or anything. That wasn't our role, but we would take care of them, patch them up, and if they needed it, they were sent to hospitals. Yeah, and if they didn't need to go to a hospital, they went to a camp, to an internment camp.
Well, What about the swastika? When was that blown?
Well, I was trying to remember. I can't quite put this thing all together because I must have been. We moved back to Salzburg then after we were replaced in Berchtesgaden. We went to Salzburg where we stayed for 2 or 3 months. And Salzburg's not far from Munich, and so I think I must have been in Salzburg when I went to Munich. And we were just going around the stadium, one day. And my God, this is the day they blew the swastika off of it. You remember the big swastika from the 36 Olympics?
Yeah.
Well, they put a charge around that and blew that swastika off it. See, and I thought, my God, the war started again.
Who did that?
The Americans or the Allies. I don't know who. I'm not really sure who did it, but it was some of the Allies. That swastika had to go. And it went. It was a beautiful stadium.
At that point, did people know about the camps? At that point, did you know about the
You
camps?
mean the concentration camp?
Well, we knew about concentration camps. Now, we didn't know about Auschwitz and and the particular ones and the ways that the Jews had been treated. That I think all came out pretty much after. There may have been some leak. There had to be some knowledge of this, but that was kind of remote from where we were and what we were doing. But we certainly did learn about them. Yeah, but there weren't many. In fact, I'm inclined to say there weren't any camps that we ever overran. We overran a lot of supply depots and that sort of thing, but I don't think we ever overran camps of people. Yeah, and then they kept moving them.
Moving
Yeah,
them to Poland.
they moved them as we would move up. They'd move the camp. They'd move them further north. So we didn't really see much of that.
In this action and moving from place to place, how well informed were you about what was going on elsewhere?
Pretty well informed actually, except when the action was on. You didn't get any information then.
And it was your own commanding officer.
Yeah, you were more interested in where you were, where your Auschwitz were, and how they're doing. But the Stars and Stripes was really a pretty damn good paper. And they did a good job of keeping you informed of the status, for instance, in Normandy, which was very interesting to us because we knew we were going into southern France, and we were wishing those guys all kinds of a success, because that would make our job easier. And of course, we wanted them to get off that beachhead to save them. We knew their lives were not worth a plug nickel out there on that beachhead. So we followed that pretty darn closely, and any other kind of news. When the bulge came along, that was well reported. And I didn't realize that.
Get your papers. I mean, somebody.
I honestly don't know where they did. They always came up from the back, from the rear. Yeah, they'd be distributed. We didn't everybody get a paper, but they'd get all passed around.
Yeah.
So, and Bill Malden's cartoons, of course, were morale boosters.
Now that photograph that Penny has of you somewhere in a mountainous area in uniform was somewhere in Europe. Where would that have been?
Was there a lake in it?
Well, we can't see the lake, but there's mountains behind. Very, like alpine.
Well, I was in the Alps. It would probably been in the Vosges Mountains, then, because that's where there was the mountain fighting we did in France.
Okay.
Went up through this Daniels, General Daniels, who was our division commander, had fought in the Vosges Mountains in the First World War. And so he wanted us back there in the Vosges Mountains. He wanted to go back.
He was nostalgic for his first war.
So his nostalgia took us back to the damn Vosges Mountains. We hated it, Nobody wanted to be up there.
Was it cold?
Well, it's cold. It was middle of winter. And it was winter fighting through the Vosges.
Well, did you spend time in trenches?
I was rarely in a trench.
Rarely?
I was rarely in a trench. I was usually not that close. The fighting, you might hear the fighting, but I was not on the front line, except very, very rarely, and usually by mistake if I was.
Well, I wish that I had known that you were not in a trench, because I had these visions of you in a trench, and I remember I'd go take your star down from the, we have those little,
Star in the window.
right,
yeah.
the star in the window, and I'm talking
was a
about
soldier
this
boy.
for Nick, because he probably had never seen any of these are like little service flags
Yeah.
with a star for how many people you were keeping watch for.
Yeah.
And we had Raymond's star hanging in the window, and I'd go take it down and sit with it. And then I'd feel bad that I was sitting near the warm fire, thinking you were off in some cold. So I'd go sit on the basement stairs. I thought that was a little more appropriate, that I suffer at least a little.
Raymond, when did you have your first drink? Was it when you were an officer and you were in the officers club and you didn't know what to order?
Well, that was back in the days when I was down I was I was in Naples when we were in the replacement depot. And the British had taken over a club in Naples that was up in the, what was it called? What was that district called? It was up on the hill overlooking the bay. It was a beautiful area. And they had this big club up there. And that's what the British had a reputation for doing. They get into a town and they take over the nice facilities. But they'd let us in, fortunately.
No, bless her.
Hell, I was 20 years old and I was trying to act 40. So I bellied up to the bar with the rest of them. And I didn't have any idea what to order, so I ordered cognac.
Ooh.
What a way to start. What a heartburn. With an English officer sitting next to me, I've forgotten his exact words now, but it was something to the effect that I see you know what to drink, or I see you know how to drink, or something.
You probably was very impressed.
Yes, I was terribly impressed, especially. I had no idea what his rank was. I didn't know a British rank, but he looked impressive, and he was not at all condescending. He was quite, he made me feel like I was really one of the boys. I didn't do that often after all
You're a mace and drink your cognac.
He didn't know that I had heartburn for a week.
Well, it's no different now. When I remember one leave that you had,
Mm-hmm.
remember you coming home for leave,
Mm-hmm.
and all of the anticipation of Joan getting ready to
Mhm.
meet your train. Now, when would that have been?
That was after OCS.
Okay, that was, you came home for what? Maybe
A week or so,
a
yeah.
week,
Mm-hmm.
about a week, and then
Because it was known that after that we were going to be assigned
Then
somewhere. That was
you knew you would be
yeah, we knew
going.
we'd be going.
And then from that leave, how long was it before you got home?
Well, till December
Of
45. So it wasn't long, really. Some of those guys have been over there. Well, since we first went, I don't even know when that was, when they landed in North Africa.
40.
Well, the war
42,
started
I
in
guess, yeah.
41, so I guess.
Yeah, were we in it by 42? Maybe so. But whenever it was, some of my unit had been in there from day one.
Uh-huh.
And boy, they were getting tired and worn out.
Well, Raymond, you took piano lessons, didn't you? When
Oh,
you
that
were
was
German?
after the war was over. When we went,
When you were waiting to be demobbed or what?
no, we went, as I said, we went to Salzburg for 3 months, and that was a wonderful experience. So the war is over, our intelligence officer. Well, it wouldn't have been the intelligence officer. It had to be the service officer. Anyway, whoever it was very knowledgeable about Salzburg. And he knew about the festival orchestras and the festival music. And he managed to get these all put back together and going again. And they were delighted. They hadn't been able to play in a long time. And they wanted to play all the music that had been forbidden under the Germans. So it was really great. We had once a week we had a chamber music concert. Once a week we had an orchestra concert, and then we'd have other music groups during which you could go someplace every damn night. And so it was
Well, that must have
3
been
months. It was,
fascinating.
really was wonderful. 3 months. I hated to leave Salzburg. I loved Salzburg.
Now, was that where you bought your Leica and?
Oh, you know, that I can't remember. I don't remember where I got those.
But I was thinking
Along the
during
way
that
somewhere, but I
time
can't remember where I got them. But
where
it
you
might have
would
been.
taken pictures and
You
you
know,
know,
I can't.
where it was at last some pleasure.
Yeah. It must have been after the war because I can't believe that they would have survived otherwise.
No.
Because your baggage was rifled all the time. You didn't have to leave anything valuable in your luggage because it.
Well, and how
The-
you had time to even
there was-
do anything like
Everybody had a duffel bag, and all of your everything you owned was put in that duffel bag when you went into combat, and that was all sent to the rear.
Mm.
And the soldiers back there and the regimental quartermaster, they'd go through it. You know, that they thought there was anything there they wanted. I lost a very nice rifle out of it, a German paratrooper rifle, and they had a wooden stock, and then the stock was hollow, and the gun was inside the stock. So the whole thing collapsed down into this small piece, and then when they take it out, and it clipped onto the stock, so it made a rifle. And I thought this may be a nice kind of a memento. I'll take this home. Well, you know, somebody else thought it was too. They took it out of my luggage. It didn't last long.
So anything you wanted to keep, like picture or
You kept them,
you had
anything like you
right
kept them
your
on you. You
body.
kept them on your body.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, you didn't expect any. You know, they wouldn't steal your socks or your shoes or but anything that they. It was free game. They didn't. So I must have cameras and anything like that. I must have gotten after the war. But
So from Strasbourg, where did you go?
then after 3 months in Strasbourg, damned if they didn't send us to Kassel, Germany.
Where's that?
And Kassel is in. Oh, where the hell is it? Is east of and well, not very much north of quite a ways east of Salzburg. It isn't anywhere near Munich. Salzburg is right next to Munich, of course. They're close. But it's sort of central. It was used by the British as a reprisal town for the German bombing of Coventry.
Oh.
The Germans leveled Coventry. And so the British leveled Kassel. Now, there is a castle at Kassel, and which may be where it gets its name. I don't know. There's a German castle there on the hill, and that whole hill area was not damaged. It wasn't bombed at all.
Mm.
I don't know how the English missed it, but they did. But the town itself was leveled. They just rubble. But in typical German fashion, the rubble was all beautifully piled up. All the old bricks and everything. The streets were clean as could be, you know, and the walls were just walls of rubble that they stacked it up. And then, of course, there was behind that stacks was just other rubble, but up where we were, there was no real damage. Only the railroad station in Kassel had been bombed a bit, but it wasn't in too bad a shape. It was still standing. But there were the houses up where we were. There was very little damage, which kind of surprised me. I'm sure they didn't know it, but the Gauleiter lived up there. We lived in the Gauleiter's house. And,
Who's the Gauleiter?
oh, the Gauleiter was the Nazi sort of overseer. He was the Nazi in control in every town. Every town had its Gauleiter.
So you were there for?
I was there until, I was in Kassel, I guess, until, I'm trying to think backward here now. I was from May, I was probably from May until, late summer anyway, maybe August in Salzburg, and then we went to Kassel. And I was in Kassel until I was sent home or started on my way home. And I didn't have quite enough points to go with Jake Drosner, who was then our division, our battalion surgeon. But Jake had enough points, but they said, well, I was so close, they'd send me along with Jake.
No, explain points.
Well, you had to have, you got sent home by the number of points you had, which is figured on how long you'd been in service,
Okay.
how long you'd been in combat. And I think it was a fairly simple formula, and I knew I didn't have enough points. But I thought, well, if they think maybe I can make it, I'll give it a try. So we were sent down to Ulm to stage to come home. This is in maybe November. It wasn't cold, maybe even mid-October, I don't know. But I got down there, and they wouldn't let me. They said, well, you don't have enough points. You can't come home. Mm. So instead of sending me back to my old unit, they sent me to a German supply depot where there were just 2 or 3 other American officers waiting just as I was. We just ran this supply depot. And we had a few soldiers to do the work, of course. And we didn't do a hell of a lot of anything, I can tell you for sure. There wasn't much to do, but we'd fill orders if somebody wanted some of these German supplies. Well, that was just outside of Heidelberg, and the general headquarters in Heidelberg kept a list of the numbers. How many points you have to go home now. And somebody from there were 3 or 4 of us. One of them was a McKesson fellow from the McKesson Drug. And I remember him. I didn't know any of these guys very long. I wasn't here terribly long. But of course, pretty soon we all had enough points to go home. And I don't know why they didn't leave me. I'm so glad they didn't leave me down at Ulm with these other guys that I'd sent me up here. Because we had a little Opel car that was part of our establishment. We had the sergeant drive us to Paris, where we caught the boat train, or the train to Calais for the other soldiers coming home. Oh, but we went in style down to Calais in our little Opel. Then the sergeant came back with the Opel and he ran the depot, I guess.
Were you in Paris enough to see it?
No, we were in transit, and we were on our way home.
You were headed
This is now December, and we're trying to get home for Christmas.
Oh, yeah.
So, hell, we were sent over to London for a few days. I put up in a hotel there for a few days while we got our orders cut. Then we were sent to Tidworth Barracks, which is near Salisbury. And we staged there. There's where they gave us our shots and gave us the flu. We were all sick. Mm. But we were well by the time we were then all moved down to Southampton and came home on the Queen Mary. Oh, wow. Jake Drosner and the guys that I'd gone with down to Ulm, where they wouldn't keep me, came home in a Liberty ship. I was home 2 weeks before they were.
On the Queen Mary.
They were weeks on the water.
Oh, no.
In December.
Oh,
Jake was really miffed when he heard that I'd beat him home.
What, do you remember when you got home in December?
Oh, yes.
Christmas? Oh.
I was home by Christmas, yeah. We landed in New York. Were quickly whisked over to New Jersey to the
what's it called?
Fort something or other there, and I can't think of it now. Mm-hmm. Where we were, they began to let us out of the military. In fact, most of our paperwork was all done right there. Then we were put on troop trains and sent out, and they did a pretty good job of getting us home on those troop trains. Were just awful, they were 4 bunks high, and it just like there were just boxcars with
bunks.
with bunks in them, and it's
Wow.
December.
Mm.
They weren't exactly very comfortable. Nobody was complaining. They were,
After the Queen Mary, that was probably filled.
well, they were in every stateroom. Officers were in staterooms, but there were about 12 officers in every stateroom. Again, they had bunks, all the way up to the
Yeah.
ceiling. Nobody was complaining, Lord, they could have put 10 more in there. We wouldn't have cared.
To just,
Everybody wanted to get home, wanted everyone else home with them.
and you've got the train let you off in
In,
Salt
Aug-
Lake.
in Salt Lake, yeah.
Salt Lake.
We went to
Yeah.
Fort Douglas, and there we were mustered out.
And then your parents met you at Fort Douglas?
No,
What
I think we were. I think the military brought us back to Ogden. I think they probably met me at the train station in Ogden. Don't remember exactly, but I think.
I remember little red, white, and blue earrings with V's, victory V earrings that Joan had that I would try on and clomp around in my mother's shoes and Joan's high heels, pretending to greet you at the train. I don't think I was allowed to come down to the train to see you. But I
They should have brung you.
They should have.
But I had it pretty easy. Lots of guys had really tough, had tough service. Mine was pretty.
The boys that you went in with, besides Dill Young, did others not come back?
I think they all did. I think everybody. I can't think of anyone else from Weber who we lost, and who went in at that time anyway.
What about your friend, your cousin who was killed?
Who? Well, he wasn't. He was killed before I ever went in.
Where was he?
Well, he was in the Air Force. He was flying P-38s, and he was in San Diego and stationed in San Diego, and was just coming in for a routine landing, and the ceiling dropped to nothing, and they just went into the bay.
Wow. Incredible.
To be continued.
To be continued.